Hello, boys and girls, and welcome back to Catechism. Yeah! Well, it's been several weeks since we saw you last. I know. Mr. Monkeybottom and I have been assisting the elders at Grace in preparing a church budget for next year, but we're back and ready for more catechism action. Right, old friend? Well, just to remind you, a catechism is a series of questions and answers that help us understand what the Bible teaches. We've already looked at the first 15 questions of the New City Catechism, which have taught us many things about God and who He is and how He made us and what He requires in His law. And tonight we come to the 16th question. What is sin? What's that, Mr. Monkeybottom? No, I don't think so. Not this week. Well, okay, well, let's ask them what they think. Boys and girls, Mr. Monkeybottom thinks it's time for another catechism rap video. What do you think? Well, all right then, that settles it. Hit it, Mr. Monkeybottom. Good evening, boys and girls, and welcome to Catechism. I'm here to teach you wisdom, and you're here so you can listen. So Mr. Monkeybottom and I will be your servants. This is a learning journey, so please be observant. The topic we're discussing today is what is sin. The Catechism gives us some help where to begin. We've talked about the fall and the fact that all is sinful, but what exactly does that mean? It's quite simple. It's rejecting or ignoring God and the world that He created, not being or doing what is required in His law. Rejecting or ignoring God and the world that He created, not being or doing what is required in His law. You see, sin is rejecting God, saying we don't want Him, dismissing Him and acting like we're better off without Him, claiming that despite the fact He made us and He's good, we don't want Him for our God and we don't see why we should. That's rejecting God, and it's an awful thing to do, in part because of all the things He's done for me and you. It's His world that we're living in. His goodness is extensive. To reject Him in the world that He made is quite offensive. It's rejecting or ignoring God and the world that He created, not being or doing what is required in His law. Rejecting or ignoring God and the world that He created, not being or doing what is required in His law. And so it's also sin for Him to be ignored, to pretend He isn't even there, much less that He's the Lord. To go day after day in His world without a thought of Him, acting like there is no God at all, well, that's sin. It's also sin to fail to be and do what He's required. And of this sort of thing, you can see why He'd be tired. He's wise and generous, and He tells us how to live, and we insist on the opposite, friends. What gives? He tells us to be humble, and instead we're full of pride. He tells us to confess, and instead we try to hide. He tells us to forgive, but instead we stay mad. He tells us to be good, but we insist on being bad. This is sin. When we don't follow His direction, or act like there's no God at all, or just outright reject Him. And sin is something awful. It's really just the worst. It separates us from our God who loved us first. It's rejecting or ignoring God and the world that He created, not being or doing what is required in His law. Rejecting or ignoring God and the world that He created, not being or doing what is required in His law. It's rejecting or ignoring God and the world that He created, not being or doing what is required in His law. Rejecting or ignoring God and the world that He created, not being or doing what is required in His law. Well, that was something. My goodness. Well, boys and girls, you get the picture, I trust. What is sin? Sin is rejecting or ignoring God in the world that He's created, not being or doing what He required in His law. So, please repeat after me. Question 16. What is sin? Answer. Sin is rejecting or ignoring God in the world He created, not being or doing what He requires in His law. Very good, boys and girls, very good. That's all for this week. Goodbye, goodbye.